Inside the Issues now takes you inside the ongoing opioid crisis in this country. We've had an ongoing investigation into it for over a year called Drugged. And as you know, America is one of the richest countries on the planet. But for ordinary people, life appears to be getting worse in a lot of ways. In 2017, life expectancy in the United States dropped for the third year in a row. And that was driven by a record number of drug ODs and, of course, a surge in suicide, now one of the leading causes of death. It's despair that is killing Americans. But what's driving that? Johann Haro is one of the smartest people we've talked to on the show. He's the author of the books Chasing the Scream and Lost Connections. We recently talked to him about what is making Americans so sad. And here's what he said. So the two things that we know about addiction are it's increasing in frequency in the United States, and we don't really have any idea how to cure it. You have an unusual and maybe true understanding of what causes addiction. Tell us how we're wrong in our assumptions about it.
Yeah, this was a very personal question for me. One of my earliest memories is of trying to wake up one of my relatives and not being able to, and I didn't understand why then because I was so small, but as I got older I realized we had drug addiction in my family. And when I got to the point where I began to research this 8 years ago for my book Chasing the Scream, I was really in a terrible state. I couldn't understand how to help the people I most loved. And so I ended up going on this big journey all over the world. I wanted to go to the places that had the toughest policies towards addiction, places that had the most compassionate policies towards addiction. And I learned many things, but I think the most important thing I learned is that actually I profoundly misunderstood what addiction actually is. And I think actually we're misunderstanding it now in the United States in ways that's disastrous. If you had asked me at the start, what causes, let's say, heroin addiction, because that's something that was close to me, I would have looked at you like you were an idiot, and I would have said, well, the clue's in the name, Tucker. Obviously, heroin causes heroin addiction.
Exactly.
We've been told a story for 100 years that's become part of our common sense, and it's not untrue, but it misses a big part of the picture. So we think addiction is caused by chemical hooks in the drug. We think if I kidnapped the next 20 people to walk past the studio you're in at the moment, and I injected them all with heroin every day for a month, at the end of that month, they'd all be addicted to heroin because there are chemical hooks in these drugs that their bodies would start to desperately physically need. Now, that's not untrue, but it's actually a surprisingly small part of the story. And we know that because of a series of experiments that were done. So this story we know that drugs are caused by the chemical hooks. Drug addiction is caused by the chemical hooks. It comes from a series of experiments that were done earlier in the 20th century. They're really simple experiments. Your viewers could try them at home if they feel a little bit sadistic today. You take a rat, you put it in a cage, and you give it 2 water bottles. One is just water, and the other is water laced with either heroin or cocaine. If you do that, the rat will almost always prefer the drugged water and almost always kill itself quite quickly, right? So there's our story, makes perfect sense.
Of course, the rat hitting the cocaine bar, a very famous experiment.
Exactly. But in the 1970s, an amazing professor I got to know well, who's based in Vancouver, called Bruce Alexander, looked at these experiments and said, well, hang on a minute. We put the rat alone in an empty cage where it's got nothing that makes life meaningful for rats. All it's got is the drugs. What would happen if we did this differently? So he built a cage that he called Rat Park, which is basically like heaven for rats. They've got loads of friends, they can have loads of sex, they've got loads of cheese, they've got loads of coloured balls. They've got everything that makes life meaningful for rats. And they've got both the water bottles, the normal water and the drugged water, and of course they try both. This is the fascinating thing. In Rat Park, when their deeper needs are met, they don't like the drugs. They hardly ever use them. None of them ever use it compulsively. None of them ever overdose. So you go from 100% compulsive use and overdose when they don't have the things that make life meaningful to none when they do. What this tells us, and there's loads of human examples I'm sure we'll get to, is the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. The opposite of addiction is having your deeper needs as a human being met. And it helps us to understand why we're seeing such a rising and catastrophic addiction crisis in the United States at the moment. We've built a society that is not meeting people's deepest needs as human beings.
Amazing. A country that really loved its people would be having this conversation, I think, a lot. And that's why I'm grateful to you, Johann, for thinking deeply about something that most people just don't think about at all.
And I think you're so right that what we have to look at is we've just got to be honest about this. If the war on drugs was going to work, when it comes to reducing addiction, it would have worked by now. The United States has spent $1 trillion on this. We've done it for 100 years. We've killed hundreds of thousands of people. And at the end of all that, we can't even keep drugs out of our prisons where we pay someone to walk around the perimeter the whole time. We have to stop copying the places that have failed and start copying the places that succeeded. And everywhere that has succeeded, whether it's Switzerland, which has reduced its heroin overdose deaths to virtually nothing, we're having a terrible crisis, I explain in Chasing the Scream how. All the models have been based, all the places that succeeded have had strategies based on love and compassion. And I know how hard that is, because I think one of the reasons why the debate about addiction and the war on drugs is so charged is because it runs through the hearts of all of us. When I look at the people I love who have addiction problems, you know, there's a big part of me that's really angry and that thinks somebody should just stop you. But then there's another part of me that thinks, okay, we've tried that way. And there are models based on love and compassion, which are hard to follow, right? It's hard to keep loving someone who's in a state of terrible addiction. And I find it really challenging, even after everything I've learned and everything that I'm talking about. But that is the only method that works. If the opposite of addiction is connection, the solution is deep reconnection. And I've been to the places that have done that, and there are many people in the United States who are trying that, who I write about in Chasing the Scream.
Yes.
We can do this, we must do this. If we carry on doing what we're doing now, we will carry on with the horrific outcomes that we're getting.
Amen. You've won me over. Johann, thank you very much for this. No, I mean it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tucker. I really appreciate it.